Wouldn't hold up gun.
If you're shooting at an airplane on the side, you looked at him through this gun sight, and you close the diamonds around the nose and the tail, and you put the dot right on the canopy, and you pull the trigger. And you didn't have to lead him like on the old P-40 shooting ducks or anything. Okay. And if you were shooting him from the back, you put the diamonds around the wings and put the dot right there on the back of the canopy and of the other airplane and pull the trigger. And it was gyros involved where you were leading him, but the gun sight was showing you that you were shooting right at the airplane. Because you had to bring, if you weren't leading him, you had to bring the sight around where the sight would actually pick him up, you know. And you just had to follow him just 3 or 4 seconds, you know, and you could fire. Well, when that airplane stopped, it was like hitting a brick wall, and my face just crashed right into that gun sight because my shoulder harness wasn't locked. Of course, I had on an oxygen mask, and that helped some, but of course it kind of it didn't knock me out, but it kind of dazed me, stunned me, and settled back down in the seat, and I looked out the windshield, and the fire was coming up from the engine. Now the canopy was still closed, and I said, I'm getting out of this thing if I have to shoot that canopy off. I had a 45 Colt semi-auto and a shoulder holster, and always wore them around on our chest because they said if you bailed out with it on the side, it'd bust your ribs. And that Colt had been tuned where it was a real fine trigger pull, and boy, I mean, I could shoot that thing too in target range. I could really shoot it. And I reached over and unlocked the canopy rollback handle and just twisted it, and the canopy rolled back like nothing ever wrong. I reached down and unbuckled my belt and threw my shoulder harness off and grabbed that oxygen mask and jerked it off, and it threw blood everywhere. It was full of blood. And I got out, pried myself out of that cockpit and got out on the right wing and looked at the engine, and I thought, well, I won't have to set this thing on fire, it's burning. And then I looked across to the left, and about a half mile, maybe 3/4 of a mile away, I could see something flashing in the sun. And I looked closer, and what it was a squad of soldiers, and this was their bayonets on their rifles that were over their shoulders, running toward me. So I jumped down off the wing, and of course, remember, I was close to these civilians. They were all still there looking. I looked back to see what they were looking at, and no wonder they were looking. That whole field was black smoke to 10, 12,000 feet from burning airplanes. We destroyed 100 airplanes that day on that field. And I had on a British Mae West because ours was one of those little flat things and hard rubber, and it cut into your neck, and they had a soft jacket type and tied or laced in front or something, and I was running along trying to tie that Mae West so I could get rid of it. And I was wearing GI boots. They told us to fly in GI boots instead of other type shoes or boots because if you got shot down and you had to walk, they were the best thing to walk in. Those GI boots felt like they were made of lead. I run onto the, I knew where I was going. I was going to run to where the houses went back a little ways from where I landed and cross this road and go on south of town and to the river. There was a river that ran through Prague. And some way or another, I intended to cross that river with a boat or whatever. And then I knew that Patton's lines were about 150 miles away, and I was going to go in that direction. Well, I didn't get quite that far because I just got to where I turned and along the edge of this group of civilians, and I heard this guy yelling in back of me, "Stop, stop!" And I turned and looked, and gosh, we were just 23. I was just a 23-year-old kid, and this guy was about 16 years old, and he was in front of the ones with the bayonets, about 4 others with bayonets, and he was waving a little pistol. And he was outrunning me. He ran right up to me waving that pistol, and I stopped and looked at him, and blood dripping down off my face, and I didn't know it then, but I had cut my forehead there, and it was bleeding, and smashed my nose. It didn't break my nose, but later on it swelled up, and my upper lip turned up and looked like a Ubangi African stuck out there like that, you know, and my eyes, my cheeks swelled up where I could almost had to pry my eyes open to see. And anyway, he run up to me and was holding that little pistol on me and said, "Have you got a weapon?" In his best Katzenjammer English. I don't know if you ever read Katzenjammer before your time, funnies in the paper, and Dad used to read them every Sunday to us. And of course, you know, W's were V's to them, and I just looked at him and said, "Well, where did you learn to speak English?" And I was kind of surprised that he was speaking to me in English. And he shrugged his shoulders and says, "Oh, we have to learn in school." And "Have you got a weapon?" Hand out for it, you know. And I nodded, said, "Yes." "It's give it to me." Still got the gun. About this time, those others had caught up with us, and boy, they had just circled me in back and all around the side, and there were these shiny bayonets, about 3 inches from me. And I looked down at those bayonets, and those guys were scared, and I was mad. Those bayonets were just shaking, you know. I thought, oh brother, one of them get excited. So I had to move real slow. And he's still holding his hand out for the gun. And he couldn't see it because I had on a flight jacket. And I reached up and unzipped my flight jacket and let my hands drop down again. When the flight jacket fell open, he could see it. And he reached and took it out of the holster. And then he wanted the holster. And he took hold of the holster and started to take hold of the holster. I said, "Wait a minute." I said, "I have to take the jacket off to give you the holster." So I had to slip one arm out of the jacket and then lift the holster off and take it out and gave it to him. And then he still got his little pistol. And he said, "Have you got any other weapon?" And I looked down at my boot. I said, "Well, I got that knife." He says, "Give it to me." So I reached down real slow and unsnapped this GI knife and pulled out the sheath and handed it to him, handle first. All these bayonets still around, and they're still scared. And they were just kids. And they, then he was going to take the knife, and boy, it was sharp, because I kept that sucker sharp. It was a double-edged thing. And he was going to cut the thongs around my flight suit, around my legs. I held the sheath on. The point of the sheath was in my boot, and the top of it was tied. And I said, "Wait." And he hesitated and straightened up. I said, "I'll get it for you." I reached down real slow and just jerked one string, and I had it tied, so you just jerk a string and it would come loose, and then I eased it out and I handed it to him. He put the knife in it. About this time, there was somebody working their way through this. Now, all these people were gathered around now, too. They weren't all the way around me, but they were on the house side of me and fairly close, about as close as for me to you, and he was between us. But then somebody started going through the crowd, working their way through the crowd, and he got through the crowd, and he was a civilian, and he had on one of those little golf caps, I guess you'd call it, and it was a little cloth cap, and not like a baseball cap, you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, they go.
Yeah, and he had this bone china cup, and he held it out to me, and I looked at it, and I wouldn't take it. And the German with the pistol was still standing there with the pistol. He says, "It's okay. It's Wasser, water. Wasser is water in German. It's Wasser." So I took the cup and nodded to the guy and rinsed the blood out of my mouth and spit that out and then drank some of it. But I was too mad to do too much. I was so mad I could have bit a railroad spike in half. Now you'd think in those conditions you'd be scared or whatever, but I always had the attitude, they can't do this to me. Yeah. And I guess I was mad at myself for making the mistake of pulling up 300 feet after that coolant line was cut. But I didn't realize then, I just knew I was mad. I was furious. And they didn't know it. I didn't say anything to them or talk to them like that. And then about the time that guy took the cup back, and I thanked him again. And of course, I don't know if he could speak English or not. He probably couldn't. He may not have known what I was saying, but he understood, And about that time, somebody else was pushing their way through the crowd. And now through the crowd come this German soldier in a suntan uniform of the Africa Corps. And that's what Rommel in Africa's soldiers wore, was suntans in the desert. And he was a corporal. He had a pistol too, but he was in his holster on his belt. And he spoke to these German kids, and I finally realized that these Germans, although they were wearing uniforms, they were in what they call the home guard. They were the teenagers in the home guard. Mm-hmm. And this guy talked to them in German and told them that he would take over now. And I knew what he was saying in German. I couldn't speak German, but I understand what he's saying. And most of it you could understand by what they were doing. And he told them to give him the weapons. And the little guy that took the .45 and the knife, he had to give them to this guy. Because this guy was a regular army, and this was just a little home guard teenager. And he gave them to him, and he told him that in German, well, he'd take over now. And so he looked at me and he didn't speak to me in English. He just motioned to me, "Rausch, come on, follow me," or whatever. And the crowd just opened up, and we were at the end of the sidewalk, but we just walked up to the sidewalk and walked down the sidewalk side of these houses, the front side of them. And we walked along and he wasn't concerned about me at all. We was walking along together. And we didn't talk or anything, we just walked along. And about a block or two, well, he turned in to the left of one of the houses on the sidewalk and went in the front door and turned to the right, and he went in evidently what was the living room, and it had kind of a bay window on the street side, sidewalk side. And this was an outpost, and he had a radio in there, and I don't know, it didn't have a telephone. I think he talked to him on the radio, and he called on the radio and reported that he had this prisoner, and they told him what to do with it. And in a little while, it was Rausch again, follow me. And we went out of the house and down the sidewalk, went back the way that we come, back where he picked me up. And off the end of the sidewalk, and it was slightly down grade, and then there was trees down there. And this was April 16th, and of course, the trees were bare, wasn't any leaves on them. But there was a little creek.
It's April 16th, 45.
45. And there was a little creek there, and we managed to step across that creek without stepping in the water by stepping on stones or logs or something. And walked through the woods on the other side, and on the other side of the little woods, it wasn't very wide, was a unpaved road, and on this road was parked a vehicle. We walked up to it, and it was like a four-door sedan. It looked like about a 34 Ford to me, might have been. And he walked up to the driver's door and talked to the driver, and they were sent by the headquarters of that area to pick me up. And he motioned me around to the other side, the passenger side of the vehicle, and they opened the back door, told me to get in, and the driver now gave him a receipt for me. He had a little pad, and he wrote on it, gave the guy that turned me over to him a receipt, so that he could prove what happened to me, see. Well, they motioned me to get in the back seat, and I got in the back seat. And of course, I wasn't feeling too good by now anyway because of getting smashed in the face, that gun sight. But the other half of the seat, all the way to the other side of the car, was nothing but guns. All kinds of guns. Rifles, all kinds of guns. Pistols laying on the seat, rifles. And I finally realized that these two German soldiers had been out confiscating guns from the civilians, and that there wasn't any ammunition in them. And they just rode along like I wasn't even in the back seat, just wishing I'd pick up one of those. So they had an excuse to shoot me. So I didn't pick up one of them. I looked at them, you know. And, they could see me look at them in the rearview mirror, but they just rode along talking in German. And we went on about 3 miles or something, 3 or so miles, and we come up to this big building, and I didn't know what it was, but wasn't anybody around. We parked in the parking lot and got out and went in, went up the steps to the front door, and they opened the door and walked in. And then we went up to the second floor. We walked down this long hallway, and on one side, on the left side of the hallway, was iron bar cells. There wasn't anybody in the cells. There was bunks in there, but there wasn't anybody in the cells. And on the other side were the doors were all closed to all the rooms. We walked down this long hall, about halfway or a little more than halfway down, and they stopped and knocked on a door. And someone asked them in German, you know, a question, and they answered, and the door opened, and as the door opened, why, there was another one of those German Shepherd war dogs inside that room, and that sucker was big. And boy, when the door opened, his bared his teeth and snarled, you know, and like he's going to jump both of us. One guy stayed with the car, and one took me upstairs. And the two German soldiers in the room, one of them spoke to the dog in German and told him to sit, and he calmed right down and sat down, stopped snarling. And they went through their procedure of clicking their heels and Heil Hitler to each other, and then the soldier there gave this driver a receipt for me again. And there were, in the room was a long table, like it was wooden, but it was a long table, and chairs around it. I guess it was a conference table, or where they ate or whatever. And it was one big room, but it was sleeping quarters for these two guys, and a basin with water, and a stove, a little gas tabletop stove where they could cook things, and they motioned me to sit down and told me to sit down at the table, and I sat down at the table. And one of them, this was getting long late in the afternoon now, 3:30, 4 o'clock, somewhere along there. One of them was cooking his supper. He was peeling potatoes, going to cook them on this little stove. The other one, he was polishing his high-top German black boots. He'd shaved and put on a fresh shirt, and evidently he's going out for a date. They weren't paying too much attention to me. One of them finally asked me, they saw that I wasn't feeling too good, and they let me go over to the sink and wash my mouth out again with some water from the sink. I just cupped some water in my hand and rinsed my mouth out. And then they asked me, did I have anything I wanted to take for, they asked me if I had a headache, and I told them yes, and they asked me if I had anything I wanted to take for them, and I said yes. And of course in my flight suit, well, I had these plastic little kits of all kind of stuff, aspirin and morphine syringes. You gave yourself morphine if you got injured in that fighter airplane. Why did anybody else give it to you?
Yeah, I suppose.
And I took a box of Bayer aspirin out in a metal container like they used to put them in. And as I opened it up, one of them says, wait, no, wait. And he held his hand out for it, and he took it, and he put it over on the other side of the table from me. It was a long table. And then one of them went down the hall because they didn't know what it was. And one of them went down the hall and got another German and brought him back. And he was in a hospital uniform. And that's when I realized that place was a hospital. And those cells were probably for insane people. But there wasn't anybody in them at the time. When it was a civilian hospital, well, it was for insane people in the cells. And this guy come in, and he was real tall, red-haired, freckle-faced guy. And of course, he could speak English. And they told him what they wanted and him to look at, and he picked up the box of aspirin and opened it up and looked at them. Of course, you know, it's printed Bayer on each one. He looked at them, and in the box, he didn't take them out. And he said, it's okay, it's just aspirin. And he gave it back to me, and I went over to the sink and put 2 in my mouth and took a sip of water and swallowed them and come back and put it back down, and he was still standing there. And he wanted to talk to me, and matter of fact is, he sort of wanted to interrogate me, you know. Well, what squadron are you with? What group are you with? What airplane were you flying? What was your mission? And I just looking at him, asking all these questions. And I said, you speak American. Where did you learn to speak American? Oh, I lived in Brooklyn before the war. I said, you did? Yeah. And then he went on asking me more questions. What was my name? And so forth and so forth. And I knew I didn't have to tell him anything. And I wouldn't say anything to him. And boy, all of a sudden he just got furious. And he says, he was real mad, and he says, Terrorflieger, you kill women and little children. Drew his finger across his throat like he gonna cut my throat. And I thought, well, you sucker, you ain't gonna cut my throat, and I know it. And he got mad and clicked his heel and Heil Hitler those other 2 guys and went out. And then the dog got between the table and me and the door on my side of the table, and he would lay down with his head on his front paws. But he was looking at me all the time. And if I even moved my chair, man, I mean, he stood up and growled, and the hair stood up on the back of his neck, man, I mean, and if I didn't stop moving, man, his teeth would be bared, and they'd have to tell him to sit again, you know. Well, after a while, a knock come on the door again, and one of them went to the door and asked and got the right answer, and a guy opened the door, and he gave them a paper that he had orders to pick me up and he signed a receipt for me, you know, and gave that to him, and they got the dog to get away from the door so I could get out. And this guy, he had on his little pistol on the belt, and he pulled his pistol out of his belt and waved me toward the door. Roush, you know, that's what the word they used. And out the door, and we walking down the hall the opposite way from where I came in, and on down the hall, and walking along, and he would point to my shoulder patch on my fight jacket, and it had U.S. Army Air Corps around it. And he read it, you know, U.S. Army Air Corps. And he was real proud he could read that English, you know. And we didn't say too much, and we walked on to the back of the hallway and down the stairs to the back, and that stairs led into a enclosed patio. It was a walled-in patio alongside the main entrance. We walked across that patio, and he opened a door, a wooden door you couldn't see out, opened a wooden door, and that was out to the parking lot. And on the far side of the parking lot was a little pickup truck with a homemade topper on it. And it looked like about a 33 or so Ford, 34 Ford. And there was a driver, and at the back of the pickup truck, well, it had two doors that opened up like this, and the doors were open, and there was benches on each side inside the topper. But there were two German soldiers, young German soldiers, and when we walked up, the oldest one gave the order in German, load and lock. And boy, I mean, they jerked these big, long, curved clips of ammunition out and stuffed them in the top of one of those rifles and operated the bolt. And of course, it had bayonet and everything else on it. And you talk about mad. Now I was really getting mad. And I thought, you guys better not make a wrong move, because if you do, you better be quick, because I'll kill at least one of you. I really thought they were going to shoot me and just haul me away, you know. But I was so mad, it didn't really bother me that much. And when I got there, by this time, we were fairly close to them when they loaded the rifles, and the guy called "Port Arms" in German, and boy, they put the rifle across their chest, you know, and "Port Arms," and the guy bringing me talked to him, and then they motioned me in the truck, and I got in the truck, and as we entered the back of the truck, I sat on the left, and one of them sat on my side, and the other one sat on the opposite side, and the one on the opposite side, he had his bayonet and his gun right here again. I looked at him, he didn't have his hand on the trigger, and it's a good thing later on. And each side of the truck, and back and in front of me, was a low window in the topper. And we were riding through town, and it was about 5 o'clock by now, and getting off time. And I saw something along the sidewalk, and I leaned over to look, and it was the secretaries and girls coming along the sidewalk from work. I could see their legs. And I wanted to get a better look, see what they looked like. And I was looking, you know, and then I looked back at this guy over here with a bayonet, and I noticed he was looking too. And so I straightened up and looked right at him. And boy, it's a good thing he didn't have his finger on the trigger, because he'd have shot me, because boy, he jerked like that and he almost stabbed me with that bayonet. I decided it wasn't a good thing to look out that window anymore. We went on, we drove on, and we come to an airfield. And I found out later it was the same airfield we strafed.
Holy cow.
And we went to the headquarters buildings, and the passenger who was in charge, he took me out, got me out, and took me to one of the buildings, and upstairs he